and welcome to another episode of Inspired Women Gathering Show. This is a show that talks about all things from life, relationships, spirituality, business, and everything in between. We're here gathering together, sharing our stories of connection and inspiration, of living into life, experiencing triumph over pain, experiencing the gifts that are meant for us. Women inspire me through their stories, the resilience, resourcefulness, tenacity, and the powerful movement that we make. My name is Dixie Bennett. I'm your host, and I'm passionate about helping women leaders live into alignment of their big vision, receiving the abundance and prosperity that is meant for them. Life doesn't have to be so hard. It can be easy and rewarding, and I love having deep conversation sharing about women who inspire me. So I'm super excited today to introduce my amazing guest, Talloolah Bliss, and we're going to be diving into the topic of tragic to magic. So Talloolah Bliss is the bone whisperer. She's a storyteller, medicine woman, deeply leaning into the great mystery of her own life, weaving personal meaning with the magic viscera of her bone collection. The bone whisperer lives a path of faith over fear, action over ambivalence, and courage over criticism. Her wish for you is to ignite a willing curiosity into the subtle whispers that unite us to each other, to the stories of the collective consciousness, and to all of the natural world. So welcome, Talloolah. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I'm so excited to dive into some really amazing conversation that I know we're going to have.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
You're so welcome. So why don't we just start off, and why don't you tell me a little bit about where you're coming in from today?
Okay. So I'm in Calgary, Alberta. I live on this really wonderful property that is quite sacred, and I feel really blessed to live here. This used to be a gathering place for First Nations people who would come to this area that we now call Beaver Dam Flats, this little forest that's surrounded by the Bow River. And this was a favored gathering spot over winter. It matters because a really foundational part of my bone collection came to me from this land. It's the buffalo femur, and we'll get into that.
Very cool. So how did you end up there? Did you kind of know that you were there, or did you know about it?
No, I had never actually even known about this part of the city before I was invited to come to an open house here. And I came to an open house about 5 years ago and put an offer in on it that very same day. And it's a very humble little spot in the city. It's up on Linwood Ridge, and I've been living here for 5 years ever since. And a lot of what I've learned about the history of this land happened after I moved in here.
Wow. That's so cool. So after, and so was there like an awakening, or did you have any interesting experiences, or how did you come to learn more about it?
About this particular
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, a part of what I learned about it is just on a sign, a sign that is at the entrance of Beaver Dam Flats. And then my personal history here sort of like wove more deeper meaning in it when the very first spring that I lived here, this buffalo femur came tumbling out of the hill. I'm up on the ridge, and then there's a pathway down into the forest, and this bone came tumbling out of the hill and sort of presented itself in front of my feet one spring innocent day when I was walking, and that happened before I received the calling of being the bone whisperer.
Wow.
So I didn't know I was picking up this bone and why I had to keep it, and I chastised myself and said, "You're not a 10-year-old boy. Why are you picking up this bone? Why are you bringing it home?" But I did, and other people that live on this property have found similar bones and have actually had them carbon dated, and bones here. So this property used to be the site of a buffalo jump. And some of the bones that have been carbon tested from here are 5,000 years old. So I consider this bone that I've got, do you want to see it right now?
Yeah, for sure.
So this is the buffalo femur.
Mm-hmm.
It's and it's broken off, and so I say that this is a bone that is 5,000 years old. So it feels really sacred to me, and as we'll get into, like I say, became a precursor to what would come to be revealed to me as the real medicine in the bone whispering that's been happening. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to go in more deeper. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, so how did you become the bone whisperer? Because I know this is something newer for you. And before even you share a little bit about that, tell us a little bit about who you were before, and then the bone, getting connected into becoming a bone whisperer, and just a little bit about your journey.
Okay. So prior to becoming the bone whisperer, I lived a pretty white bread life. I'm a mom. I have 3 sons who are 15, 17, and 20 now.
Oh, wow.
And when they were younger, I was a homeschooling mom. I was an unschooling mom. So I was already pretty inclined to a non-conforming way of being in the world. And professionally, I've been a freelance contract writer I always say I've been a freelance contract writer for 1,000 years, but it's actually technically been about 35 years. And always specializing in public relations and marketing type content. So I've spent a career talking to people and hearing about their stories and telling other people's stories. And my first claim to fame was that I used to write speeches for Mayor Klein when Premier Klein was Mayor Klein.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, I've been in Calgary and writing for a lot of years. I've traveled around. I've been in Ontario and BC and Alberta, but yeah. So yeah, I just kind of was like I often say that I've lived quite an extraordinary life for someone as ordinary as me, because I really have had a very ordinary life, and I am quite a not extraordinary specimen, and yet I have had quite extraordinary experiences that at my age, that I'm just coming into a place where I'm really starting to embrace and lean into that, because it's quite mysterious and magical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about this magical, and I think it's too, you know, we all think that we're ordinary at the end of the day, and we're just living our ordinary life and going through our ordinary things, and then all of a sudden we have these like big epiphanies or extraordinary, out of this world kind of awakening or experience. I know I've had a lot of those myself, and even as my gifts have unfolded, I didn't know that I had gifts. There were just some things in the background that were just kind of there. I didn't know that it was different or special, or and some of those gifts have unfolded. So share a little bit more about some of these magical qualities that have unfolded for you.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I will tell you about the moment that I became the bone whisperer. Mm-hmm. And I have my little prop here for that, and it's so tiny that it's like it's really hard to see.
Oh wow.
Literally this little bone that is the smallest and the most fragile bone in my collection is responsible for me being the bone whisperer.
Beautiful.
And I was at a weekend event. I was at a festival, and it was the end of the weekend, and we were doing a cleanup, and I was just wandering around in sort of the main area where people had been gathering and dancing and celebrating all weekend long, where trucks had driven in, and you know, dollies and trolleys had been wheeling over. And this little item, which I actually thought was a piece of plastic, which I was going to pick up and throw away, was laying there on the ground right in front of center stage, where literally all weekend long, like there could not have been a more well-traveled place all weekend long. And for this like tiny, tiny little fragile little bone to have sustained itself intact was the first moment of sort of miraculous insight for me. So when I picked it up, I thought it was a piece of plastic, and the minute that I picked it up and had it in my hand and realized that it was a bone was the moment that I had my experience of download. And if I can talk about that for a minute, it was the kind of experience that I've read about. I've read Neil Donald Walsh having these kind of experiences, and other types of speakers and authors speaking about the experience of having this like download and receiving information. And I've been a pretty avid student of that kind of content my whole life. And I've always been very skeptical. I've read the words that others have said was downloaded or came to them in this big epiphany moment, and I've always just thought, well, anybody can come up with that. Like I could write that stuff. And but this was an experience that actually was a download of information. And for the next 45 minutes, as I held this bone in my hand and sort of walked around in this kind of stupor as I was receiving information, it was like instantly this was in my hand, and it was just shown to me that this was a bone that was a part of a collection of bones that I already had at home. And this phrase, which is now sort of my catchphrase or slogan, I guess, if you will. I've got a big banner that I had made up, and this slogan is on the bottom of it. And this is the phrase that was told to me: "These are the bones of your ancestors." And that phrase, "These are the bones of your ancestors," dates back now about 5 or 6 years ago. It dates back about 5 or 6 years to something that I was shown and told in a ceremony, in an ayahuasca ceremony and I've been journeying with ayahuasca for about a decade or longer than sort of everybody was doing it. I had never known of anybody who was doing ayahuasca the first time that it came to me, or it wasn't commonly talked about. But I was in a ceremony actually on my mother's birthday, my mother's 67th birthday, and I was born in 1967. And when they get coincidental like that are pretty interesting to me. And it was in that ceremony that I was shown myself to be inside the belly of a whale, inside the rib cage of a whale. And as far as I could see in front of me and as far as I could see behind me was this tangle of bones.
Wow.
And I was told, "These are the bones of your ancestors." So as I was walking around with this bone that day at the festival, that was one of the things that came to me. And I was shown, "This is the beginning of your calling as the bone whisperer." And for all of my years of experience being a writer and telling other people's stories, I was told, now it's time for you to tell your story, not just tell other people's stories. You've gotten good at getting to the heart of the matter and how to communicate around a thing, and now it's your story to tell. And your story is actually your medicine. That is the primary conduit of your medicine.
I totally agree with that. That's a big part of who I am, is I help people tell their stories through their pain or their journey. And there's so much liberation that can happen when we share our stories. And we can actually live through the story and start to see the gifts of what that story or experience actually was meant for us. So unleashing the stories of our own selves is so liberating, and other people connect with it, right? And that's a big part of why we're here today. Also, is just to share the story, because it is time. It's time for everyone to come forward. And, you know, some of my mentors and teachers talk about the gap, you know, coming back and sharing. The greatest storytellers are going to be the most successful in business going forward. And I think we're also at a time where we need to come back to story. We need to come back to the gathering. You know, I love that word, the gathering, you mentioned it a couple times as well, you know, is the gathering of the elders, the gathering of the sacred, where the buffaloes came, right? Yeah. And there's so much power in the gathering. So, and coming together collectively, sharing the stories and the bones of our ancestors absolutely have so much to share.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting experience since that moment. Is it okay for me to talk a little bit more?
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things that was shown to me in that sort of 45 minutes, so I had whispers talked to me, I had sort of snapshots shown to me, I had visions shown to me, and one of the things that was shown to me was the two other bones. Like, I've got like quite a number of bones now that have come to me since, but there are three bones that are the center of my collection. And so I was shown this particular bone is not even a bone, it's an orca tooth. And I found this on Whalebone Beach on Gabriola Island about 10 or 11 years ago. And this is a really, and this is the first bone that I found that forms a part of this bone whispering saga. This is the first time that I picked up a bone, which is a tooth actually, and knew the minute that I picked this up and that I found it, that I had found something sacred and something special. And I found it, it was like, it's this humble little thing. It's you know, this is how big it is. It was in a sea of oyster shells. So if you can imagine a whole beach littered with white oyster shells, and to find this bone amongst that, this tooth amongst them, was quite extraordinary. And I figured, well, if there's one, there must be a ton more. And I spent days more on that particular beach, grazing, looking for more of these, and there was no more of it. And I brought this into the Vancouver Aquarium and had a team of biologists all of a sudden around me that were very, very interested in this tooth. And they had a lot to tell me about this tooth. And that's where I learned even that it was an orca tooth. I had actually thought it was a sea lion tooth. But this bone, this tooth, together with this first bone that I found, and the buffalo femur that I showed, are the three foundational pieces in my collection. And these three bones, when you lay them out, and if you want, I can kind of like, I've kind of set it out on a tray here so that I can hold it up and try to show you.
Sure.
Because and I might have to like tilt my camera a little, so just bear with me while I do that.
Oh, good. Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So when you see them together, and why I want to show them together is because these bones represent the Fibonacci. And when that was shown to me, and so when I talk about my bone whispering, I often will refer to they, because that's my experience of the whispers. The whispers come from a they.
Right.
And the they is, many other people that might be having this experience might have a different language for it. I call it, it's the collective consciousness. And the bones that I have in my collection are the tangible stuff of, almost in a way, the iconography of bone whispering. But whether or not and I almost always have this tooth with me. This tooth comes with me everywhere. Cool. And as does this tooth that I wear a lot. But I don't need to have the bones with me in order for me to be the bone whisperer, or in order for me to hear the whispers, because the bones became kind of like a key that unlocked my capacity to hear and or their capacity to speak to me.
Beautiful.
So when they showed me that these three bones And this small, tiny little bone, I since learned, it's the wing bone of a bird. So it's so small that it's probably like a hummingbird's wing or something like that. So I've got this hummingbird's wing, this orca tooth, and this buffalo femur that represent creatures of the sky, creatures of the sea, and creatures of the land. And when they are together, they represent the Fibonacci sequence. And it's and the Fibonacci sequence is often is often called the golden ratio. And I didn't know anything about the Fibonacci sequence. I had never even heard that word when it was supposed to be, this is the Fibonacci. And when I went and learned got online and went to see what is the Fibonacci, and I learned it's the golden ratio. It's a mathematical sequence that all of nature is built on. And it is a ratio of something small to something mathematically a certain ratio bigger, and then a certain ratio bigger than that. And it's always represented in the 3. The middle of a sunflower. That visually represents the Fibonacci sequence. So
yeah, so beautiful. So at what point did you start getting the whispers? Like, when did you start recognizing that the whispers were coming through you? Or was it a development? Did it happen over time, or was it more?
I would say that from the first moment that I picked up that orca tooth, that there was something in me aware of something. So what I say is that I became consciously aware of the whispers of inside the bone whispering. I became consciously aware of that immediately before my 50th birthday, when I picked up that little hummingbird wing. But I was less than consciously aware of the whispers for about a decade before that, because I knew, as I was finding this bone and that bone, I knew that I needed to have them. I knew that they were something special to me. I often would laugh at myself, and the way that I would self-denigrate around it is I'm acting like a 10-year-old boy, and I don't know why, but I need to have these bones. And so they've been like in my house and in my yard, and just a part of, my weird eccentricity that I didn't understand until the day that I picked up that small bone. And then I knew that I knew something. And since that time, and that's been about 3 years now, almost 3 years, that I've known myself as the bone whisperer, and known myself to be cognitively, consciously aware of when they're talking to me and what they're teaching me. Yeah.
Beautiful. So at what point did you, well, obviously, I mean, you haven't had much any traditional training in this kind of an experience, right? So how have you kind of navigated through these unknown waters?
Yeah, that's been, that has honestly been like the pivot point of my becoming, because
I love that, the becoming.
Yeah, it is some kind of strange to stand up. And one of the first things that they told me that very day is talk about it, tell people. And I was mortified. How does a 50-year-old woman stand up and start saying to her community and to her people, hey, I'm the bone whisperer? And then people naturally are going to say, oh, what does that mean? How did that happen? How are you the bone whisperer? And all I could say is, I don't know. They told me bone whisperer. I've often, I say that I've lamented that there are no mentors for bone whispering, but it's not really true that I've lamented it, because it actually has, it has spurred me on to be more courageous in becoming it. Because I know that I hear things. I know that I'm instructed. It's almost like whenever I begin to lose faith in this, or begin to like really question, what am I doing? who do I really think I am,
Mm-hmm.
they will show me or give me something else. And that happened for me. I don't exactly remember when, but it was in the first year and a half, that as like I was completely hooked when they showed me that this was the Fibonacci, and that this particular triad represents creatures of the sky, creatures of the sea, creatures of the land. But then that has become, oh, I'm getting a little note that my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully it's
Good.
still.
You're good.
Okay. One night I had, it was a sleepless night, and I had another experience of this powerful download, and I just got up in the middle of the night and I just started taking notes, and whatever they were telling me, I just started taking notes and just took it all down. And I was up for about 3 hours taking notes. And then I closed it up and I went to sleep, and when I got up in the morning and I read it all, I was just blown away.
Wow.
And so what those notes in a nutshell comprise is a teaching of that I am to be a student of these bones and the teachings of these bones for the rest of my life in this ever unfolding triad, which is built on that this bird's wing bone, the most delicate, fragile one in the collection, represents faith. And the orca tooth represents action. And the buffalo femur represents courage.
Oh, wow.
And I was shown that that's how life works. You have faith, and then you take action, and then the courage comes after you take the action. And it was such a huge insight to me, because I've lived a life that went the other way around. I always thought that if you had faith in a thing, then you had to like muster up the courage and, you know, get all the courage, and then you would take action once you were all full of your courage. Right. But they showed me that's not how it works. You have faith, and then you take action, and the courage is born from the action. And that is what feeds the faith, that again inspires you to action, that again inspires more courage. And doing this interview with you is completely.
Well, congratulations. I know it's a big leap for you to do this, and I think that message is so powerful, right? Yeah. Faith, action, and then courage. Yeah. And you just keep cycling through it again and again and again. I think that message is so powerful, because I do find a lot of people, they just sit. They're still sitting and waiting. They're trying to muster up the courage to do anything. Yeah. But I think the courage does come as we keep moving through. Yeah. Right. And I think I can really resonate with a lot of what you shared, because I know for myself, as I awakened, I had all these amazing experiences that none of my friends were having, even some of my spiritual teachers. I was like, oh my gosh. So, I just had an angel come into my room, and they're like, oh, and I thought I was just the weird one. And how do you share that with people? Because I came very much, from a heady background, very much like yourself in the corporate industry. Yeah. And how do you talk about this kind of stuff with people? And I've been doing this work for 10 years. I would say the last couple of years, I've been more comfortable talking about my connection to angels, my connection to other experiences that are not necessarily of this world. And very much like you, I have not had a lot of mentors. I've just kind of, messages have come through, or I found the next teacher online that just gave me the right information at the right time. Yeah. But I just kept moving through. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how that's been my experience as well. Once I'll tell you a story about this wingbird bone. It's like, it'll be so precious to me. Within months of finding this and knowing that I'm the bone whisperer and doing a few talks and starting to share about this, I brought my collection to an event, and I was going to do a talk, and it didn't end up happening. And And this bone ended up falling out of the bag that I carried it in. I now have a very precious way that I transport my bones. But at that time, it was all kind of new to me, and it was just kind of shoved into a bag.
Throwing her bones in a bag.
Yeah.
A bag of bones.
And it fell out, and it got broke.
Oh.
It actually got shattered into 4 pieces, which in a way almost made it even more remarkable that I ever found it intact in the first place, because it was shattered and broken in a room with no other people around. And I hunted around on the floor to find all of the pieces, and in fact, I only found 2 of the 4 pieces. So this tiny little bone was broken into 4 pieces, and I only found 2 of the 4. And I brought it, and I was devastated. Devastated. I wept like a baby. I felt so chastised. I felt that I had dishonored this sacred gift, and I spent time. I came home. I set it in the middle of my living room table. I set all my other bones around it, and it sat there, this broken in 2 bone, while I contemplated whether I was actually a worthy steward of being the bone whisperer, since I couldn't even take care of the most important bone in my collection. And I almost gave it up. I almost said, I don't even know what this is I'm giving up, but clearly I'm a dumbass, and I'm not responsible with my sacred objects, and maybe I was just making this all up anyway. And I let it sit there on the table for about a week, broken, as I would kind of walk by it and spend some time with it, and I didn't know what to do. But in the end, I glued it back together. I prayed, I did ceremony, I asked, and definitely the message was it was certainly a message of the fragility of life, the fragility of calling, and the courage that it takes to put a thing back together and claim it, name it and claim it, and do it anyway.
Well, that goes back to your faith, right? Action and then courage, right?
Literally.
Yeah, so living into it. I love that.
Yeah, totally. And so inside the experience of being with the bone itself is the teaching. And in the last year, I've really had an opportunity to deepen even more into my calling as a bone whisperer, as my life circumstance took a significant, unexpected and unwanted change. And inside a lot of grief around that, I again called into question, am I really strong enough to be the bone whisperer? So a part of what I do love about this work, about this calling, is that it does bring me into my innocence. It does bring me into my playfulness, because since there are no bone whispering mentors that I'm aware of on the planet, I get to play with it. I get to claim it. Nobody's going to tell me, come along and tell me you're doing.
That's your sacred gift. Yeah. Well, it's the awakening of the sacred gift.
Yeah, and there's nobody around to tell me that I'm doing it wrong.
Right.
But the bones themselves are the ones that are here to tell me that I'm doing it right. Because while I was in the deep mourning, deep grief, deep contemplation of, do I really have the stuff to continue being the bone whisperer, I had someone come along and gift me this one. And this is a fossilized ear bone, also from a whale.
Oh.
And it, let me see if I can just put it exactly together the way it goes and see if I can show how this works. This is a complete and perfect yin and yang.
Wow, yes.
The curve of that is showing so well, but it fits in with the very first icon that I found, this orchid tooth.
Yeah. The balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just became another, it was just another undeniable representation of the teachings of the bones, which really are, the bones themselves are the teachers, but they're the viscera of the past. They're the viscera of the ancestors.
Love that.
And the whispers are the voice from the collective. They're the promise for the future. And I'm the interpreter. I'm the conduit of the messages. I've got these bones. I've got these symbols, these representations. And then I've got and inside this interview and inside any of the work that I do with my bone whispering is the action to interpret and help others and myself recognize the patterns that are around us every day and that are alive inside of us. And we're the interpreter of those patterns. And what we are going to do with those patterns. Are we just going to play them out in this unconscious way? Or are we actually going to stop enough to be present inside this present moment to notice what life itself is teaching us? And how can we take what we know about our patterns and the patterns all around us to form and frame the infrastructure, the architecture of our life and our life story moving forward.
So what would you say the bones have taught you the most?
They have definitely taught me to be here now. They have taught me the most about being present. Because without the discipline to be present, it would have been very easy for me to sort of slip by any of these moments and not have fully imbued myself with the wisdom of what was potentially here for me in this present moment. And here I'd really like to give a shout out to a book written by a man called Michael Brown. And it's a book called
Process. Yes, I've highly recommended. I can't say it enough. It's one of my favorite books. Yeah. And I read that book and did when you do the presence process, it's a 10-week self-directed study into coming into the now. And you're supposed to do it 3 times over. And I confess that I've only done it 1.5. Yeah, I've done it once too. But I find that I really live into the presence process. It's really powerful. And I have had some of my clients have done it 3 and 4 times. And they're still learning into it, right? I think it's a, going back to what you said, it's an unbecoming, right? We're learning to, I'm passionate about unwinding, unbinding, right? So we're undoing a lot of the circumstances that have happened to us. And then we're unwinding it into coming into absolute presence. And that's really the only thing we have control over in each and every moment.
Yeah. And so I was already with the presence process with, and others like Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, like there's been so many, Marianne Williamson, Neil Donald Walsh, Gary Zukav, like so many really powerful presence leaders have been around for us, but it was the presence process that I was in and with for like almost a year before I became the bone whisperer. And so I was already disciplined and studying inside of the now. But what the bones teach me about being in the now is like sometimes when so there's like aspects of being the bone whisperer that's just being a receiver, a listener to the messages that the collective consciousness is speaking to and through me. And some of it is actually about being a bone finder, a bone collector. And when I'm really listening to myself, I've had some extraordinary experiences of being called to find bones. And
give me an example of what that
Yeah, I would love to. So when I first became the Bone Whisperer at this festival, and I was told right away to talk about it at closing circle, I did do, and I said, "Hey everyone, thanks for having a great weekend with me. Can I tell you about this thing that just happened to me?" And so I'm the Bone Whisperer, and and I don't really know what that means, but I've been asked to ask you and to ask others, when you think of me, when you think of Talloolah Bliss, the Bone Whisperer, I want you to pray for me in whatever form you pray for, and to ask for wisdom and knowledge and insight to be brought to me and through me. And
I love that.
yeah.
Asking for what you need, right? That's so
Yes.
beautiful. And putting it out there.
Yes, and the vulnerability of that is enormous. But every single time that I have done a bone whispering talk, I always close with that. And so at that closing circle, immediately after the circle was closed, I had this woman approach me, and she said, "I have a gift for you." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "Yes, I've been holding it on to you for years."
Wow.
Really? And she said, "Yeah, will you be here next year?" And I said, "I will now."
That's so cool.
And so so she described to me that she had been gifted this bone years ago, and she's a vegan. And she never felt good in herself about having this bone. It really sort of like rankled or itched at her consciousness, her sense of ethic. But it was given to her by a good friend of hers with a lot of love and care and consideration, but she knew that it wasn't hers, and that she was just holding on to it until the actual the intended recipient of it came into her path. So when I shared with her that I was the Bone Whisperer, she said, "I'm going to bring this bone for you next year at this festival." And so she did do. And she said, "You're really going to love it. It's got some henna art on it, and that is this little bone right here, like maybe a little bit hard." Yeah. And so by the time that I was given this bone, so you can't see it really clearly, but it's got these little somebody did some fine henna art on it, and like made little pinpricks into it, and there's a new moon on one side, a full moon on the other.
Oh, wow.
And so by the time that I was given this, I kind of had found like a lot more bones by then, and I kind of thought I knew a little something about what bones were and what type of bones. And I had deduced that this bone is what I said it was potentially a femur from a porcupine.
Oh, wow.
I had thought that maybe it was. And so for the next, like year and a half, I kind of lived with that this is, well, I guess for about a year, I lived the story that this is, a femur of a porcupine. And then I was out on Vancouver Island, and I spend a lot of time out there. And I was out on Vancouver Island, and one day when I woke up, a lot of times the whispers will come to me in dreams. And that particular morning, as soon as I was on waking, I knew that I had to go take this almost 2-hour drive to this spot, to Port Renfrew, actually. And I didn't really want to do it because I had other stuff on my agenda that day that I was going to do. It wouldn't leave me. You have to go.
When spirit speaks, you have to listen.
That's what I have learned.
Yes.
It's humble enough to listen to the great mystery, to listen to the whisperings of the mystery when it comes. But sure enough, I drove all that way. I pushed it off until if I didn't go now, then I was going to be doing it in the dark, and I didn't want to do that. So I just finally went. And when I got there, I approached the ocean. I sat there, and I was almost in an argument with them.
I've had those too. Really?
I was kind of bitter with them, like, okay, here I am, now what am I going to do? Watch the tide roll in, like I had things to do. And there was just this pushing, and it was go that way. And so I walked down the beach that way, and about 100 yards on, I came to a dead seal
Oh.
rolling around in the surf. And it was all there, except the skull was gone. And it was quite intact, like it was just the seal. There was a few, at the head where the skull was gone, there was exposed some vertebrae. And of course I wanted, and I sort of like got my hands in there and I was like trying to pull, but it was all still very intact and I couldn't get any of it out.
Yeah.
So I just kind of was there and contemplating it, and interesting and fascinating. And I walked around, and when I came around to the tail end of it, there were 5 bones that were loose from the carcass.
Right.
And this is one of them. And if the camera can show, this is literally the exact bone that I was gifted a year later at the festival. And so I was taught, this isn't a porcupine femur, this is the tailbone of it's the tailbone vertebra of a seal.
Wow.
And now why I needed to know that, I still don't know.
Right.
But I do know that they wanted to correct my story so that I stopped saying that it was a porcupine femur, because it was a vertebra from the tailbone of a seal.
Right.
And the extraordinariness of that was, again, just another teacher to me to keep listening.
Right. Yes.
Even when those whispers make no sense at all, and I have no reason to listen to them, I have no agenda. Like, I was happy with my little porcupine femur story.
Right.
I was okay. And I did not know that I was about to be schooled, but I did know I'm establishing a relationship with the listening. I'm establishing a relationship with knowing when I'm being whispered to, and to listen to it. And like, this is just one story. I've got lots and lots of them like that I've had these extraordinary experiences that are, I have no explanation for them except for that they're happening, and that they're happening to me and through me. And I'm like a child. I'm just so innocent with the discovery of it. And I've got the whole rest of my life to deepen into the maturity with the medicine.
I think that's the biggest, and that's been one of my big lessons too, is really to come to things with a childlike innocence.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, it's not something that I can control, but the more I allow myself to play into it, there's a deeper ease with it. I know I had an experience where I was defiant and I did not want to participate. And so I literally put a wall up and I shut it down, and I got really, really sick for about 2 years. And it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible for me. Very detrimental, physical, emotional, spiritual. Did you ever have an experience like that where you actually wanted to just close the door and kind of run away because you didn't understand? Or have you just always kind of acknowledged and accepted and just kind of moved forward with it?
No, there's been lots of little moments, like I've shared a couple of them, where I've kind of like stopped and questioned, you know, is this really real? Is this really for me? Before we started, you asked if I had like a meditation or anything to share, and as we're chatting, there's something that's coming through that I do want to share, and it speaks to the question that you just led into, which is when things kind of like changed quite suddenly for me a couple of years ago, and I was in a moment of, or about a year and a half ago, when I was like all of a sudden being confronted with a significant life change. I spent about, I went out to the coast again, out to the island, and I spent about a month sitting in an old growth forest. And I just would go out to this forest every single day, and I would just be there. And every single day I was asking myself, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you here? But there was just this, again, just this calling just to be there. And on 8/18/18, so August 18th, 2018, I had, and if it's okay, may I read something that came
Yes,
through
absolutely.
that day? So I should have set this up ahead of time, but it's easy to find. I had this message come through, and it's a message that I want to make into a bit of a storybook. And if it's okay, I will just read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
This was one of those times where I was like really questioning whether I am the bone whisperer, whether I actually do hear whispers from the collective consciousness, from the divine, from the sacred, from the ancestors. And after about almost 3 weeks of sitting inside this old growth forest, this came through, and it's a manuscript that I call Play, and it speaks to the innocence.
Beautiful.
When we are a child of the body, we play. This is how we grow and learn. Never underestimate the value of this childhood. Without it, we would have no grown-up. When we are a child of the mind, sorry, I'm just going to back up and say what is so funny is that every day when I went into the forest, I would just come, like I would just be there with me. I would have like a little rug that I would set down on the floor and I would sit down on. But this particular day, I got told, bring something to write with, bring a pen and paper. And so I did, and this is the thing that came through that day. When we are a child of the mind, we play in the realm of ideas and inventions. Much human innovations, machinations, never know how to say that word, machinations, and technologies are the result of human beings fully participating in the childhood of their minds. Never underestimate the value of this childhood. Without it, most of what we understand as human civilization would not exist.
Wow.
But when we are a child of the heart, we play in the shadow realm. This is where we begin to explore the objects, places, and practices that cause us to question the nature of life. In this realm, we have been, throughout recorded history, commonly maligned, misunderstood, and at times outright murdered.
Wow.
Much wisdom of the natural and supernatural world has been lost to material and economic forces that have distracted humanity from the sacred and ancient objects, places, and practices that used to bridge humanity to our divine interconnectedness with all of existence. Much wisdom remains to be unveiled. Never underestimate the value of this childhood. Many have lost the ability to hear the calling of the heart. You have not. Play.
Wow. Thank you so much for that insight. Oh, that just, it brings so much home. You know, I have all these conversations quite often about coming back into the essence of the childlike wonder, and just being in the childlike energy, because that's really where our magic, that's where all the magic, I love the childlike mind, childlike heart.
Yeah.
And the shadow of the heart. Yeah, because that's where the learnings are, for sure. I love that.
And
Thank you so much. Well, we're just coming to the end of our time, so that was such a beautiful, beautiful share, and I so deeply appreciate all that you shared with me today. So just to kind of wrap up with, you know, what would be, you know, other people, if you wanted to share one piece of advice, what would it be for people who are just kind of, you know, maybe sitting on the edge, kind of sitting in the safety zone, and kind of, you know, they're getting those divine whispers to do something more, but they're kind of resisting it. So what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, what I'm going to say is kind of like a perfect way to close, and I'll be very succinct with it, but it goes to the title of this talk, Tragic to Magic. When I was, I've been involved in self-examining and personally developing for a long time. And in that process, and in the last couple of years, I've really had the opportunity to use my present moment awareness of what I'm actually feeling in the now to notice the times in my past where some of my ways of being were patterned into who I am.
Mm-hmm.
The tragic to magic technique is recognizing that we can take our present moment now and trace back to the wounded inner child.
Mm-hmm.
And find the source origins of the injuries that fed into the patterns and the sort of automatic way that we have of responding to the world now. And the tragic to magic technique is imagining, as we heal ourselves in the now of those childhood traumas and injuries from long ago, we also can do the same thing with our now self, imagining into a future version of us that is also there to coach and encourage and inspire us to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And that future version of us, if we imagine that whatever it is that we're up to right now in the name of becoming better at us, less victimized, less reactive, more thoughtful, mindful, and responsive.
Mm-hmm.
If you imagine doing this work and deeply devoting whatever your practice is. My practice is I've got my ceremony that I do with my bones. I have a meditative practice, and I've got other types of deeply ceremonial practice that I bring myself to. If you imagine taking yourself and whatever it is that you're doing in the now that you think is a good thing, whether that's like improving your diet, whether that's if that's just like changing the way that you maybe take a breath when you feel reactive to something, whatever is the practice that you're doing right now, and imagine that you deeply devote yourself to that for the next 30 years. Imagine how amazing you are going to be in 30 years having practiced that for that amount of time. And then allow that future version of you, that improved, that softened, that wizened future version of you, talk to her, talk to him, talk to them, talk to that future version of you and ask it, her, him, what should I do now?
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe, I've been doing this myself, and this is what I call the tragic to magic technique. I really believe that humanity can really be propelled forward in meaningful and significant and productive ways for the future of humanity by tapping into the future wisdom that is available within the divinity, within the sacred, within the great mystery of the collective consciousness, God, whatever the language is that you have. It is there and available to us.
Mm-hmm.
Ask it. Ask it.
Mm-hmm.
When you pray, if you have a challenge with praying, as quite frankly I did for a lot of years,
Mm-hmm.
Pray to a future version of you. She knows you. She knows where you need to be held in a more compassionate way, and she also knows where you need to be pushed a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
your habits are in the way.
I love that. Yeah.
Expressing. And returning to the innocence, like that's been such a huge piece for me to come to the place of recognizing that that I'm a good person, I'm a kind person, I'm a compassionate person. I've been programmed. I've been innocently programmed. No one meant to harm me with dysfunctional programs, but it did occur, and it's okay. There's forgiveness and grace in letting it all go and staying open anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Stay open to the innocence. Stay open to the possibility and whatever. And two other things that I always say is in my talks is, however much time you spend in nature right now, I don't care if you're out in nature every single weekend or every single day, however often you're in nature right now, get out in it more.
Yeah, double it,
more
mm-hmm.
time in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever piques your curiosity, whatever it is, dive deeper into that.
I love that.
Yeah. And you will find that your life will begin to unfold in magical, magical ways just because you gave yourself permission to get more curious about what sparks your curiosity.
I love that. Yes, that's one of my favorite words, curiosity, right?
Yeah,
So
core
being
value
curious.
of mine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be curious, be curious, be curious.
Yeah.
Right? And ask curiosity questions.
Yeah.
And that I feel like we're never guided wrong when we ask from a place of curiosity.
Yeah. And be willing to go inward. Like we live in times where everything is external and all the, you know, the construct of our matrix is built on the idea of professionals and experts. And it stymies us in ways because, you know, a lot of what I've done or haven't done has been governed or controlled by my own perception of my lack of expertise or my lack of being a professional. And I think that's why they gave me the gift of getting to be the bone whisperer, because they're literally, I mean, until I invent it, there's no bone whispering academy.
Right. Well, it's the academy of life, right? I think I'm a student of life, and I always will be. I love the learning. I love the experience. And I think too, going into nature, you know, nature is one of my best friends. You know, there's so much wisdom and so much teaching that nature has to share with us. And when we can actually get quiet and still enough to actually listen to the whispers of what nature has for us, right? Or whether it's nature or whether it's the whispers coming from other areas, the divine nudges or the divine whispers, you know, just and be able to have faith, right? And to take action and to move forward with the courageousness. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. This has been absolutely amazing. I love, you know, we've met a few years ago or a couple years ago, and I always wanted to get to know you more. So I'm deeply humbled and grateful that we've been able to sit together, have conversations, and I so hope to and look forward to more conversations with you.
Yeah, me too. You. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Talloolah. Thank you everyone for watching today and being with us. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share it out with your community so that we can continue to bring light, love, and hope to the world. And until next time, abundant love to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.